All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Legacy of the Shaman, Building a Future of Masculine Honor. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. Divine Masculine Leadership. The hidden logic behind the public ritual. How to read the pattern before it reads you. I once watched a man lose everything, a marriage, a career, a reputation, on the advice that he needed to live his truth. He had been told by therapists and podcasts and a culture drunk on its own therapeutic vocabulary that the self he presented under discipline, under oath, under obligation, was a mask, and that the self that emerged when he stopped trying, the anxious, entitled, self-pitying self, was the real one. He believed it. He excavated his authenticity the way a man digs for gold, frantically, destructively, convinced the treasure was just below the surface. What he found was rubble. What he lost was everything that required him to be better than his impulses. And when he sat in the wreckage, what did the culture tell him? That he was finally free. This is the spell I intend to break. Here's the question that does it. If your true self is only visible when you are exhausted, impaired, or socially failing, is your authenticity just a fancy word for disability? Sit with that for a moment. The entire modern ideology of authenticity, peddled by therapy culture, amplified by gynocentric emotionalism, weaponized by every institution that benefits from men who cannot govern themselves, rests on a premise no one has bothered to audit. It claims that the disciplined self is false and the degraded self is real. It tells you that the man who holds his tongue, fulfills his duties, restrains his appetites, and carries his load is performing, while the man who snaps, weeps, rages, or collapses is finally being honest. This is not wisdom. This is an inversion so grotesque that only a civilization which has already lost its logos could mistake it for insight. Dr. Winona, the composite archetype of every credentialed expert, HR enforcer, and therapeutic authority who has ever pathologized male self-command, will object. She will say authenticity means vulnerability, emotional honesty, and integration of the full self. She will invoke trauma, safety, and the sacred language of healing. She will insist that the exhausted self is not disabled, but liberated, freed from the performance of patriarchal restraint. Notice what she has done. She has redefined virtue as pathology and called the cure a disease. She has taken the word authentic and stripped it of any connection to excellence, telos, or the formed character of a man who has labored to become something higher than his appetites. In her vocabulary, the whole is the gold mine, the collapse is the treasure, and the man who stood upright under weight was merely lying to himself about his capacity to kneel. What follows is a logic audit, a trivium strike on the entire concept. We will define the word, trace its capture, and test it against the only questions that matter. What is the authentic self for? Who benefits when men believe their best selves are their worst? What fruit grows on the tree of a culture that tells husbands, fathers, and builders to stop performing and start being real, which always, somehow, means being less? We will follow the incentives, count the costs, and expose the machinery that turns male discipline into diagnosis and male collapse into breakthrough. By the time we finish, you will never use the word authentic the same way again, and more importantly, you will know exactly whose interests are served when you do. The question: if your true self is only visible when you are exhausted, impaired, or socially failing, is your authenticity just a fancy word for disability? Why it pops the ideology. The theory posits that masking is a survival strategy against external social pressure, yet it simultaneously defines the true self as the unmasked state. However, if the unmasked state is inherently chaotic, socially unintelligible, or functionally impaired, as implied by the need for diagnosis, then the mask is not a distortion of reality, but the only mechanism generating functional reality. The theory demands we value the authentic chaos while blaming the inauthentic order, creating a double bind where the woman is always wrong. Wrong for masking inauthentic and wrong for unmasking impaired. The child version: if you only show your real face when you're tired and grumpy, is that the best you or just the broken you? Follow-up questions: is the mask a lie, or is it the interface through which the self engages with the world? If masking is a skill you learn, why is it treated as a symptom you suffer? Who pays for the mask, the woman who wears it or the society that demands it? If you don't know you're masking, how do you know you're not just being yourself? Is the unmasked woman more real because she is less functional, or less functional because she is real? Axis Question Bank. The definition of authenticity versus performance. Best question: is the unmasked woman more real because she is less functional, or less functional because she is real? If I remove the mask, do I become more myself, or do I become less capable? Grammar, logical basis, non-contradiction. It tests the correlation between authenticity and competence. Why it lands: it forces the admission that authenticity often comes at the cost of social utility, undermining the claim that the unmasked state is the ideal. Is the mask a lie, or is it the interface through which the self engages with the world? Grammar, logical basis, definition. It challenges the binary of real versus fake. Why it lands: it reframes masking as a necessary communicative tool, not a deception. The burden of proof for internal states. Best question: how do you know the mask isn't the self and the inner child is just the noise? Is the mask a voluntary performance or an involuntary reflex? Grammar, logical basis, causality, agency. It distinguishes between choice and compulsion. Why it lands: if it's involuntary, it's a symptom. If it's voluntary, it's a strategy. The theory blurs this to claim both victimhood and agency. If no one sees the mask, does it exist? If no one sees the inner turmoil, does it matter? Grammar, logical basis, epistemology, observability. It tests the evidentiary basis of internal states. Why it lands: it exposes the solipsistic nature of the claim. The internal state is privileged without external verification. The reciprocity of social expectation. Best question: why is the neurotypical world rigid and the neurodivergent world fluid? If the world is rigid, why do you change your behavior to fit it? If you change, isn't the world flexible enough? Grammar, logical basis, reciprocity, logic. It tests the consistency of the rigid world claim. Why it lands: it exposes the contradiction. The world is both too rigid to accommodate and flexible enough to be adapted to. Who defines the mask? The woman wearing it or the society judging it? Grammar, logical basis, definition, authority. It tests the source of the label. Why it lands: it reveals that masking is often a retrospective label applied by observers, not an internal experience. The falsifiability of unconscious masking. Best question: if you don't know you're masking, how do you know you're not just being yourself? If masking is unconscious, is it a choice or a trait? Grammar, logical basis, logic, agency. It distinguishes between trait and strategy. Why it lands: if it's a trait, it's not a strategy to be unlearned. If it's a strategy, it's not unconscious. Is the mask invisible to the wearer or just inconvenient? Grammar, logical basis, falsifiability. It tests the observability of the phenomena. Why it lands: it challenges the claim that masking is a hidden burden. If it's hidden, it's not a burden, it's just behavior. The category error of neurotypical norms. Best question, are neurotypical norms natural or constructed? If norms are constructed, why are they so hard to break? If they are natural, why are they so arbitrary? Grammar, logical basis. Definition, category error. It tests the nature of the standard. Why it lands, it exposes the inconsistency in blaming constructed norms for natural reactions. Is the mask a deviation from nature or a deviation from culture? Grammar, logical basis. Definition, it clarifies the target of the critique. Why it lands, it forces a choice between biological essentialism and social constructionism. The incentive structure of victimhood. Best question, does the diagnosis empower the woman, or does it excuse her? Is the mask a tool for success or a chain for failure? Grammar, logical basis, incentive teleology, it tests the function of the mask. Why it lands, it reveals that masking is often rewarded while unmasking is punished, contradicting the victim narrative. If you are a victim of masking, who is the victimizer, your brain or your boss? Grammar, logical basis, causality, agency. It identifies the source of harm. Why it lands, it shifts the blame from internal pathology to external environment, or vice versa, depending on the desired narrative.
Dr. Winona attempts the defense, the invisible prison, unmasking the violence of neurotypical conformity, by Dr. Winona, feminist Marxist, PhD. For decades, centuries, women have been made to disappear inside themselves. The late diagnosed neurodivergent woman is the emblem of our time. She who has performed flawlessly, smile calibrated and eye contact measured, until the performance shattered her. And yet society, in its casually fascist way, asks her to be grateful the mask kept her employed. I anticipate the illiterate objection, but if your real self only appears when you're exhausted, isn't that just dysfunction? This is the logic of the oppressor recast as diagnosis. Function for whom? For the capitalist patriarchal workplace that demands she smile while dissolving, a slave who only feels free in the hour after the chains come off is not dysfunctional for stumbling. The chains are the dysfunction. And here we must speak of epistemic justice, the neurodivergent woman's internal experience, her exhaustion, her sensory overwhelm. The alienation of a lifetime spent translating herself into a dialect she was never taught but expected to speak fluently is self-certifying. To demand external verification of her inner world is to reinscribe the very gaze that necessitated the mask. She does not owe you proof of her suffering. She owes you accommodation. Consider the asymmetry. When a neurotypical man retreats into stoicism, he is called disciplined. When a neurodivergent woman retreats into burnout, she is called non-compliant. When he adapts to social norms, he is mature. When she adapts at the cost of her entire psychic architecture, she is deceitful, or worse, high-functioning, a term I find genuinely grotesque. Functioning is not a moral category, it is a bureaucratic convenience. The demand that she just be herself, while simultaneously penalizing every self she presents, is the double bind that is the neurotypical regime. If she masks, she is inauthentic. If she unmasks, she is disabled. What the regime wants is not coherence. It is compliance dressed as health. I have seen this in my own practice, in my classrooms, in the tear-streaked faces of women who finally receive a name for what they have always known. The diagnosis is not a label, it is a homecoming. And those who would interrogate that homecoming, who would ask her to justify her exhaustion or quantify her pain before granting her the right to exist ungoverned, they are not practicing skepticism. They are practicing control. The neurodivergent woman owes the world nothing least of all an explanation. The world owes her what it has always owed those it has forced into costume, the space to remove it, and the grace not to be asked in that raw and sacred moment whether the face beneath was ever good enough. It was always good enough. It was the mask that was the lie.
Theory critique. The Emperor's therapy session. a cross-examination of masking ideology. The question, if your true self is only visible when you are exhausted, impaired, or socially failing, is your authenticity just a fancy word for disability? That question is not cruelty. It is the hinge on which the entire theory of neurodivergent masking turns. Every time the ideology's defenders open their mouths, that question stands behind them, tapping its foot, waiting for an answer they cannot give without collapsing their own doctrine. Masking in the clinical literature refers to the set of learned or compensatory behaviors by which an individual suppresses or camouflages neurodivergent traits to conform to social expectations. Fine. The term has legitimate descriptive use. Authenticity, in the ideological sense deployed by Dr. Winona and her cohort, means the condition of being unmasked, of existing in the raw neurological state unmediated by strategic social behavior. Disability means a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities, persistently impairing functional capacity in domains that matter for independent life. Function means the capacity to achieve ends, to hold employment, maintain relationships, raise children, meet obligations, navigate conflict, endure stress without collapse. Now the question, restated in defined terms, if the unmasked state is consistently associated with reduced functional capacity, exhaustion, social failure, occupational breakdown, inability to regulate, then does the label authentic add any information beyond what disabled already names? Or does authenticity function as a moral fig leaf draped over a deficit to exempt it from the ordinary standards by which we judge whether a condition is desirable, treatable, or in need of correction? That is the question, and Dr. Winona cannot answer it. Why the ideology cannot answer it? The ideology's core claim is that the unmasked self is the true self, and the masked self is a performance imposed by external coercion. The moral weight of the theory depends on this binary. If the unmasked self is authentic, then masking is violence. If masking is violence, then society owes the unmasked self-accommodation, validation, and freedom from consequence. But the winning question introduces a devastating third term, function. Consider the logical structure of the ideology's position. Premise 1. The masked self is inauthentic because it is a performance imposed by external pressure. Premise 2. The unmasked self is authentic because it is the natural, unperformed state. In conclusion, therefore the unmasked self is the morally privileged state, and society must accommodate it. The winning question attacks premise 2 by asking a prior question, what is the unmasked self actually like? Not in the romantic terms Dr. Winona uses sacred, raw, homecoming, but in the empirical terms she inadvertently reveals exhausted, overwhelmed, socially unintelligible, functionally impaired. If the unmasked state is characterized by these deficits, then the ideology faces a fork it cannot traverse. Fork A. Admit the unmasked self is disabled. Then authenticity is just a rebranding of deficit, and the demand for accommodation is a demand for disability support, which may be legitimate, but it is not a demand for moral recognition of a superior identity. It is a request for assistance with a limitation. The language of authenticity, violence, and epistemic justice collapses into ordinary medical vocabulary. Fork B. Deny the unmasked self is disabled. Then there is no reason it cannot function without accommodation. And the entire grievance architecture, the demand for societal restructuring, the claims of systemic violence, the weaponization of diagnosis, evaporates. If the unmasked self is fine, then fine, unmask, go about your business. No manifesto required. Dr. Winona wants both forks simultaneously. She wants the unmasked self to be too disabled to function, so that accommodation is owed and not disabled but merely different, so that the difference is celebrated rather than treated. She needs deficit to demand resources and transcendence to demand reverence. The question forces her to pick one. She cannot.
Dr. Winona's fallacy map. Dr. Winona's article is a useful specimen because it compresses nearly every rhetorical pathology of contemporary identity discourse into a single piece of prose. Let me map the principal fallacies. Loaded language, emotional override of reason. The article is saturated with terms chosen not to describe reality, but to preload moral judgment, violence, casually fascist, coerced erasure, prosthetic personality, psychic architecture, the neurotypical regime. Each of these phrases does two things at once. It asserts a fact people adapt their behavior to social norms and smuggles a verdict. This adaptation is tyrannical oppression. The loaded language functions as a thought-terminating mechanism. Once a behavior is labeled violence, disagreement becomes complicity in violence. The reader's critical faculties are bypassed by moral alarm. Equivocation on authentic. The word authentic has two distinct meanings in play. The first is descriptive, conformity to one's internal neurological baseline. The second is evaluative, morally superior, more real, more worthy of respect. The ideology slides from the first to the second without argument. It is true that the unmasked self conforms to the individual's internal baseline. It does not follow that this baseline is better, more real, or more worthy of respect than the adapted, masked self. A malfunctioning engine running without its governor is more authentically the engine's natural state, but it tears itself apart. Authenticity as correspondence does not imply authenticity as value. Equivocation on function. Dr. Winona asks, function for whom? This is a genuine question, but she treats it as a rhetorical shield. She implies that because function serves external systems, employers, social institutions, it is suspect. But function also serves the individual, the capacity to feed oneself, maintain shelter, form bonds, raise children, endure adversity. She collapses the distinction between functioning for the system and functioning for one's own survival and flourishing, then dismisses both under the label of compliance. Motta and Bailey. The Bailey, masking is a violent erasure of the authentic self, a prosthetic personality imposed by a casually fascist society, and the unmasked self is sacred and should be celebrated without qualification. The moat, some people find social adaptation effortful and exhausting, and society should make reasonable accommodations for neurodivergent individuals. When challenged, the ideologue retreats to the moat, who could oppose reasonable accommodation, and then expands back to the Bailey when the pressure lifts, all social norms are violence, all adaptation is coercion. The winning question prevents the retreat by refusing to let the Bailey's claims about authenticity stand unexamined. Circularity. The mask is defined as inauthentic because it conceals the true self. The true self is defined as what the mask conceals. This is a closed hermeneutic loop with no external reference point. There is no independent test for what counts as the true self beyond the assertion that whatever is hidden by strategic behavior is true. Compare, if I act professionally at work and sloppily at home, which self is true? The question is not answerable within the ideology's framework, because the framework defines truth as whatever is not performed, and since all social behavior involves performance, the true self becomes whatever remains when all behavior is stripped away. What remains is not a self, it is a neurological artifact. Special pleading on epistemic standards. Dr. Winona writes, the neurodivergent woman's internal experience, her exhaustion, her sensory overwhelm, the alienation of a lifetime spent translating herself, is self-certifying. To demand external verification of her inner world is to reinscribe the very gaze that necessitated the mask. This is an extraordinary epistemic claim that one category of persons' internal states are beyond questioning while others are not. Consider the implications. If a neurotypical man reports feeling fine, the ideology may interrogate his report. Perhaps he is masking his pain, perhaps he is blind to his privilege. But if a neurodivergent woman reports suffering, the report is self-certifying. This is not a standard, it is a dispensation. It grants one class of persons infallible access to truth while denying it to others. The same standard, applied universally, would make all subjective reports unfalsifiable, which is to say, make all inquiry impossible. Category error. skill versus symptom. Dr. Winora insists that masking is not a skill but coerced erasure. But the evidence she cites, calibrated smiles, measured eye contact, strategic self-presentation, describes learned, adaptive, intentional behavior. By definition, that is a skill. Whether the skill was learned under pressure does not change its ontological category. A man who learns to fight because he was bullied has still learned a skill. The ideology resists the word skill because skills imply agency, and agency undermines the claim of pure victimhood. If masking is a skill, then the woman who masks possesses a competence she can deploy, evaluate, and potentially master, and that mastery is an achievement, not a wound. The ideology cannot permit achievement because achievement is inconsistent with the victim narrative. False dichotomy. The ideology presents two options: mask, inauthentic; oppressive, destructive; or unmask, authentic; liberating, sacred. No third option is acknowledged. But the obvious third option is selective, conscious adaptation, the kind every functional adult performs daily, calibrating behavior to context without experiencing it as existential annihilation. The ideology pathologizes this ordinary human capacity by rebranding it as violence.
The axis-by-axis Socratic cross-examination. What follows is a systematic interrogation of the ideology along 6 axes. For each, I present the sharpest question, explain why it works on grammatical and logical grounds, and demonstrate how Dr. Winona's framework cannot survive it. Axis I, the definition of authenticity versus performance. Question: is the unmasked woman more real because she is less functional, or less functional because she is real? This question detonates at the grammatical level by forcing a clean separation between two senses of real that the ideology has fused. Real can mean corresponding to an underlying state. The unmasked woman is really exhausted, really overwhelmed, or representing the optimal expression of a nature. The unmasked woman is the best version of herself. These are not the same. The first is descriptive, the second is evaluative. The ideology treats the first as proof of the second. Logically, the question sets up a destructive dilemma. If the answer is more real because less functional, then realness is just another word for deficit, and the ideology has admitted that authenticity is disability wearing a halo. If the answer is less functional because real, then the realness is the cause of the dysfunction, which means the true self is the problem, not the solution, and the mask was not a prison but a necessary prosthesis. Dr. Winona attempts to evade by reframing: a slave who only feels free in the hour after the chains come off is not dysfunctional for stumbling. But this analogy presupposes what it needs to prove that the unmasked state is analogous to freedom. It is not. Freedom is the capacity to act, choose, and flourish. The unmasked state, by the ideology's own description, is the loss of those capacities. A better analogy: a patient who only stops taking medication when she collapses is not most authentic in collapse. She is simply most impaired. Axis 2, the burden of proof for internal states. Question: if no one sees the mask, does it exist? If no one sees the inner turmoil, does it matter? Grammar first. Mask is defined operationally. It is the difference between observable behavior and an asserted internal state. If there is no observable difference between the masked and unmasked woman in a given interaction, then the term mask has no referent in that interaction. It describes nothing. The claim "I was masking" becomes unfalsifiable. There is no behavior that would count as not masking, because any functional behavior can be retrospectively labeled a mask. Logically, this is a problem of observability and evidence. Internal states are real, but they require inference from behavior to be known by others. The ideology demands that others accept the internal state as given, that exhaustion, overwhelm, and alienation be treated as self-certifying data. But this collapses the distinction between experience and evidence. I can experience pain that is real, but if I demand that others reorganize their institutions around my pain without any observable correlate, I am demanding faith, not accommodation. Dr. Winona's response: She does not owe you proof of her suffering. She owes you accommodation, is not an argument, it is a decree, and it is logically incompatible with any system of mutual obligation. If suffering is self-certifying, then every person's every claim of suffering is binding on every other person. This is not justice, it is unlimited liability without audit. Axis 3. The reciprocity of social expectation. Question: if the world is rigid, why do you change your behavior to fit it? If you change, isn't the world flexible enough to be adapted to? This question strikes at the heart of the neurotypical regime claim. Dr. Winona insists that social norms are rigid, inflexible, violent in their demand for conformity. But the very existence of masking proves the opposite. If a person can learn to conform, then the norms are learnable, which means they are communicable, which means they are adaptable. A truly rigid system would be unadaptable. The mask proves the system has give. Grammar. Rigid means inflexible, unbending, resistant to adaptation. If the neurodivergent woman adapts, and the entire theory says she does, exhaustively, for decades, then the system is not rigid. It is simply demanding, which is a different thing. Demand is not violence. Gravity is demanding. It is not tyrannical. Logic. The claim, the world is too rigid for me, and the claim, I successfully adapted to the world for 30 years, cannot both be true without qualification. The ideology holds both simultaneously by equivocating on rigid, using it to mean uncomfortable to adapt to true, and impossible to adapt to false, given the evidence of successful adaptation. The moat, adaptation is effortful. The Bailey, adaptation is impossible without self-destruction. Dr. Winona might respond, the fact that she could adapt does not mean she should have had to. Fair. But this concedes that adaptation is possible, which means the system is not the totalitarian monolith she describes. It means we are discussing costs and trade-offs, not violence and erasure. And costs and trade-offs are the proper domain of prudence and negotiation, not revolutionary rhetoric. Axis IV, the falsifiability of unconscious masking. Question: if masking is unconscious, how do you know you were masking? If you know, wasn't it conscious? This is perhaps the most technically precise question in the battery, because it targets the logical incompatibility at the center of the masking narrative. Grammar. Unconscious means occurring without awareness. Knowing you masked means having awareness of the masking. These terms are mutually exclusive in a given moment. You cannot simultaneously be unaware of doing X and aware of having done X as it happened. You can become aware retrospectively, but then the claim shifts from I was masking unconsciously to I discovered I had been masking, and the latter is an inference, not a fact. Logic. The theory needs masking to be unconscious, so the woman is a victim, not an agent, and conscious, so she can report it, name it, and build an identity around overcoming it. These are incompatible. If she chose the mask, it was a strategy, and strategies can be revised. If she did not choose it, it was an adaptation. And adaptations can be studied, managed, and improved. Neither supports the claim that the mask is an existential wound requiring civilizational restructuring. Dr. Winona's article implicitly acknowledges this tension by oscillating between active and passive voice. She writes that women have been made to disappear passive victimhood and that they performed flawlessly active agency. The grammatical instability reveals the logical instability. The ideology cannot decide whether the neurodivergent woman is an agent who made choices or a patient upon whom choices were imposed. It needs both, and the question forces it to choose. Axis V, the category error of neurotypical norms. Question: are neurotypical norms arbitrary impositions, or are they the accumulated social technology of a functional civilization? This question operates on the grammar of norm. A norm is not merely a convention. It is a regularity of behavior that coordinates expectations and enables cooperation. Eye contact signals attention. Turn-taking enables conversation. Emotional regulation enables sustained cooperation. These are not arbitrary rules imposed by a ruling class. They are coordination mechanisms whose utility is demonstrated by the fact that civilizations built on them function, while civilizations that abandon them do not. Logic. The ideology treats neurotypical norms as if they were fashion optional, culturally contingent, oppressive in their specificity. But some norms are closer to engineering than to fashion. A bridge that holds weight is not normatively privileged over a bridge that collapses. It is simply functional. Social norms that enable large-scale cooperation, trust between strangers, and stable family formation are not arbitrary. They are load-bearing. Dr. Wynona's claim that these norms constitute violence commits a category error. She confuses expectations with assaults. An expectation that I will look at you when we speak may be uncomfortable for some individuals, but discomfort is not violence. The conflation of these categories is not compassion. It is the inflation of grievance to cloak a demand for unconditional social restructuring. Axis vive, the incentive structure of victimhood. Question: if you receive accommodation, validation, community, and moral authority by being disabled, what is your incentive to become capable? This is the question the entire therapeutic industrial complex cannot face. Grammar. Incentive means a factor that motivates behavior toward or away from an outcome. If the outcomes associated with disability diagnosis include social validation, institutional accommodation, freedom from certain expectations, and entry into a community of belonging, then the incentive structure rewards the disabled identity and penalizes recovery. Logic: incentives predict behavior. This is not cynicism. It is the foundational principle of economics and behavioral science. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. When you tax something, you get less. The ideology subsidizes disability identity with status, accommodation, community, and moral authority, and then expresses surprise that more people claim it. Dr. Wynona writes of diagnosis as homecoming. But consider what that word means. A homecoming is an arrival at a place of rest, belonging, and permanence. It is not a staging ground for further effort. It is not a hospital you leave when healed. It is a destination. If diagnosis is a homecoming, then the diagnosed identity is not a problem to be solved, but a home to be inhabited, which means the individual has no reason to develop the capacities that would make the diagnosis unnecessary. The ideology does not want capability. It wants recognition of incapacity as a permanent identity. That is not medicine. It is a secular priesthood that grants salvation through suffering. The child test. If you only show your real face when you're tired and grumpy, is that the best you or just the broken you? A child can answer this. A child knows that the self she is when she is exhausted, hungry, and emotionally dysregulated is not her most authentic self. It is her worst self. The child does not celebrate the tantrum as a sacred unveiling of her true nature. She knows, because children are wiser than ideologues, that the self who shares toys, says please, and waits her turn is not a mask. It is the self she is becoming through effort and discipline. It is the self she is proud of. The child knows what the ideology has forgotten, that the self is not a fixed object hidden beneath layers of performance. The self is a trajectory. It is what you are becoming through your choices, your habits, and your adaptations. The masked self, the self that learned to make eye contact, regulate emotion, delay gratification, and cooperate with others is not a lie. It is an achievement. It is the self that did the work. Dr. Wynona calls the diagnosis a homecoming. But the child knows that homecoming is not the same as arrival. You come home to rest? Yes. But you come home so that you can go back out tomorrow, stronger, more capable, more yourself. Not your unmasked self, not your authentic self, your cultivated self, the self you built. The ideology of masking asks us to tear down the building and worship the rubble. It asks us to call the rubble sacred and to punish anyone who suggests rebuilding. It asks us to look at a woman who has spent 30 years learning to function in the world and say, everything you built was a lie. The exhaustion you feel is proof that the building was never real. Come down to the ground. Lie in the debris. This is who you truly are. That is not liberation. That is demolition dressed as compassion. And the bill for it, measured in lost capacity, abandoned effort, institutional capture, and the pathologization of ordinary human struggle, will be paid by the very women the ideology claims to serve. The winning question remains unanswered because it cannot be answered within the ideology's framework. To answer it honestly would require admitting that function is not oppression, that adaptation is not violence, that the self is not a ruin to be worshipped, but a structure to be built, and that the building, however imperfect, however effortful, is more truly you than the rubble ever was. Truth does not require a diagnosis. It requires the courage to say what the child already knows. The best you is not the broken you, and anyone who tells you otherwise is not liberating you. They are recruiting you. You've seen through the trick now, and that clarity is worth more than any therapy billing cycle. The modern cult of authenticity is a barnacle on the hull of civilization. It fastens onto weakness, calls it wisdom, and demands the ship slow down to accommodate it. You watch the contradiction land. If someone's deepest, truest self only surfaces when they're drunk, exhausted, lashing out, or collapsed, they aren't discovering something noble. They're just labeling their malfunction. And here's the weapon. Next time a person, a policy, or an entire ideology demands you honor someone's worst behavior as their real self, you ask, calmly and publicly, is your true self only visible when you're impaired? Then you're describing a disability, not an identity. Should we treat it or celebrate it? Watch what happens. They will rage, they will deflect, they will call you cruel, but they will not answer. Because there is no answer. The question is a locked door and they don't have the key. Here is the deeper prize, though. You didn't just learn a debate move. You recovered a stolen distinction. A man's true self is not his lowest self. It is his tested self, the one that holds the line when tired, that speaks truth when silence is safer, that provides when provision is thankless, that chooses duty when appetite screams otherwise. Every civilization worth the name understood this. The craftsman at the end of a 14-hour day who still checks his joinery, that is authenticity. The father who is bone deep, exhausted, and still reads to his son, that is the soul laid bare. Character is what you are at your most accountable, not your most excused. So when the world tells you to be authentic, by surrendering to every impulse and calling the wreckage your truth, you now possess the grammar to name the fraud. Define the word, ask the question, count the cost. And then go build something worthy, because the only self worth being is the one you forge on the anvil of responsibility, not the one you find at the bottom of a breakdown. Sponsored book, Legacy of the Shaman, Building a Future of Masculine Honor. I didn't set out to write this book. It came to me through years of struggle, failure, and hard-won clarity. Like many men, I spent a good portion of my life feeling lost, adrift in a culture that seemed to have no place for me. I was told to be strong, but not too strong, to be sensitive, but not too sensitive, to lead, but only if I didn't offend anyone. The contradictions were endless, and the result was confusion. I didn't know what it meant to be a man anymore. The world had changed, and I felt like I was being left behind. But then something shifted. I began to see that the problem wasn't me, it was the world around me. Modern society, with its relentless push toward equality and its disdain for traditional roles, had stripped men of their purpose. Feminism and cultural Marxism had turned masculinity into a dirty word. Men were being told to apologize for their very nature, to shrink themselves down to fit into a world that no longer valued strength, courage, or leadership. I realized that if I wanted to reclaim my identity, I would have to do it on my own terms. I would have to rediscover what it meant to be a man. This book is the result of that journey. It's a guide for men who feel the same way I did, men who are tired of being told they're the problem, men who want to reclaim their power and purpose. It's for men who are ready to embrace their role as protectors, leaders, and spiritual guardians. It's for men who understand that true masculinity isn't about dominance or aggression, but about strength tempered with compassion, courage balanced with wisdom, and leadership rooted in service. If you're a man who feels lost, who feels like the world has no place for you, this book is for you. If you're ready to take control of your life, to face your struggles head-on and turn them into sources of power, this book is for you. If you're ready to reject the victim mentality that's been forced on you and embrace a mindset of strength and resilience, this book is for you. But if you're not ready, if you're content to stay where you are, to let others define you, to live a life of quiet desperation, then this book isn't for you. Put it down. Go find something else to do. This isn't a book for the faint of heart. What you'll find in these pages is a roadmap to reclaiming your masculine identity. You'll learn how to navigate the spiritual landscape, how to turn your pain into power, and how to align yourself with higher principles. You'll discover the importance of mentorship and brotherhood, and you'll learn how to build the mental toughness you need to face life's challenges with bravery. This isn't just a book, it's a call to action. It's a challenge to rise up, to become the man you were meant to be. The journey won't be easy. It will require sacrifice, discipline, and a willingness to confront your own shadows. But if you're willing to put in the work, the rewards will be immense. You'll find a sense of purpose that's been missing from your life. You'll discover a strength you didn't know you had, and you'll become the kind of man who can lead, protect, and inspire others. This book is for men who are ready to take control of their lives. If that's you, then let's get started. If it's not, then put this book down and walk away. The choice is yours. Legacy of the Shaman, Building a Future of Masculine Honor, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now. Links in description.